Hi, I'm Peter Bell, and I'm CEO of Kermode Resources. I saw some good discussion happening on one of those videos from the 911 mining company and wanted to make a little video here to reply to them. So I will show you the comment now and then give some thoughts. So we're talking about the video, drilling into massive chalcopyrite zone at the copper zone. What does it all mean? Gold, right? Meanwhile, Mark Rose came through here with a pretty quality comment. So first he's saying 911 can't speculate for compliance reasons, basically taking new samples, the showings for Kermode. Yep, you're more right than wrong. The details of 43101 give us more leeway than you might think regarding samples that were taken historically before we got involved. We can use them for some of our disclosure, but there are kind of strings attached in terms of giving a source and saying that, you know, whenever we refer to any of those numbers, we didn't prepare them. Particularly in 43101 rules, the disclosure of historical resource estimates is really what they have a lot of language about. Individual exploration results are a little bit less specific in the Canadian rules. And then this talk about a prospectus is a little bit overkill for us because we're already public. So typically we do non-prospectus offerings, you know, private placements, and we don't go through the full rigmarole of prospectus. But what you say about Kermode investors, potential investors, being able to use what they see in these videos to make an investment decision, yeah, I don't know if I'd phrase it exactly that way, but a big part of it for me as management is an ability to see what the crews are doing on the ground. So we have an idea, more than just a verbal description or a couple pictures. These videos are game changers in terms of being able to understand what's going on out there. Yes, using the samples to decide where to drill more extensively. Yes, this is it. Mark, you're exactly right. And what you say about a bigger partner coming in to, you know, paint the full picture of the deposits. Sure. Yeah, that is the nature of the game. And yeah, you go on to say it doesn't mean anything yet. Fair enough. And the old samples were enough to get us interested. Yes, they certainly were. And we'll want to see what else can be found at surface before we get into the expensive and relatively slow process of permitting and managing a full core drilling program. You know, where we'd be drilling holes that are 100 or 200 meters, maybe, rather than 1 or 2 meters, right? You go on to talk about multiple veins and wanting to intercept as many as possible. First drilling to see how thick deposits are at depth. Later drilling by a bigger company would be more systematic. Fair enough. Yep. I don't know if I'd call these things veins at this point because, you know, the typical VMS model, volcanogenic, massive sulfides, it's the massive sulfide layer that we look for is usually stratigraphic, and it's related to deposition in oceanic settings. Not a geologist, so I can't speak to what terminology we should use exactly here, but the veins can kind of come up more in feeder zones as opposed to some of the basic stratigraphic horizons that you might conventionally find in the VMS targets. But it gets complicated because, you know, you can have either one going on in one, you know, one VMS system can have the feeder zones and it can have the stratigraphic layers that have a lot of metal endowment potential. So one other thing too I'll say is that, you know, the textbook model of what this deposit is or that deposit, it's useful, but boy, oh boy, local conditions matter, right? So post-mineral, post-orogenic formation, right? After the thing's been created, all kinds of stuff can happen. And especially in areas like BC, Cordillera, you get a lot of complex faulting, subduction zones, thrust zones, all kinds of accretionary stuff going on. And all of that geology and tectonic stuff that's happening on kind of a continental scale, believe it or not, it can have a big impact on kind of local deposits. And, you know, some of these faults can be the source of heat that can cause remobilization. They can also be the source of structural changes. So what was once a nice flat said horizon can become something all broken up and pushed and twisted and more complicated than it was when it first, you know, developed. So long story short, we don't know yet really what this is other than high grade at surface, right? And we have some indications that things look like this and look like that. It's like, okay, we can start to put these into little buckets in terms of the basic models, but there's a lot we don't know. And I'm not, you know, I'm not here to write a textbook on this project. I'm really here to, as you say, find something exciting enough for a larger company to buy and develop. And beyond that, maybe I just, you know, continue to say that in the same way that local conditions affect the geology of these deposits and kind of make them somewhat unrecognizable in certain circumstances, right? Something similar applies to the companies, right? And so the companies can be, you know, very much the same from one to the other, right? Your basic description of what a junior is and what a junior should try and achieve, fair enough, it's on point. But the local circumstances really matter, right? So without getting into the full history of Kermode and what I'm trying to do here, suffice to say that what the 911 crew are doing in terms of their ability to mobilize and get smart work done quickly, very meaningful for me, right? Because we don't have a lot of money in the company, but we have this need to do something, right? I've been on the board of directors a couple years, and I became CEO about a year ago, and the pace of play for a long time in the company hasn't really been very aggressive. It's been kind of on ice, and the guys who were running it had other companies that they were doing more things with. So now they're not involved anymore, and I'm running this one. It's my first time running a public company, and you know, I'm a markets guy. I'm a mathematician, economics background. So, you know, I'm thinking about this more in terms of like gambling theory and, you know, the statistics around speculations rather than academic geology in some way. I certainly care about economic geology, and that's really why I like what these guys are doing, because these guys are finding, you know, the high grade occurrences that give us the inspiration to do the harder work to figure out what's hiding there, right? There's kind of two features that I've heard about that are important statistics with regards to hunting for meaningful deposits. One is that you want to see kind of high grade kicks. You know, you want to see fat tails in the distribution of sample grades. And then the other thing is you kind of want to see elevated baseline. So it doesn't need to be in all the rock units, but you want to have your target horizon, I believe it's fair to say, with kind of elevated baseline levels of your key metals, right? So that kind of shifting the distribution of grade up and increasing the amount of metal content in a given zone of rock. How did the metal get there? Complicated question, not necessarily the question I'm primarily trying to answer, really, right? The primary question I'm trying to answer is more something like, can we mount a meaningful work program here? You know, or are we going to be stuck waiting 2 years for drill permits, right? And so the ability for the 911 guys to get out there with the backpack drill and do the meaningful work quickly. You know, there's some people in the exploration business who would look down on backpack drilling and say, oh, you know, and they would laugh, you know, if they saw pictures like this of the drill core recovery that we're getting here. And that's fine, you know. We're kind of on a ground floor opportunity with regards to Kermode anyways. You know, it's a 1-2 million Canadian market cap, which is pretty small. So, you know, our ability to raise significant amounts of money and do what would be seen as like a normal work program for a junior is somewhat impaired by our small size and also by the market conditions as well, more broadly. The world is in a lot of chaos right now, and expecting that I'll be able to go out and raise this or raise that, you know, risk capital based on some initial showings or whatever, it's not guaranteed, right? So what I look for in terms of being CEO of this company is, how do I get work done that gives shareholders a chance at being involved in some meaningful progress on project side, you know, without impairing the stock or the balance sheet or the ownership structure, right? And start to get into some of these financing schemes with these people in the junior mining markets that can be fraught with all kinds of risk. And there's enough risk already in this business without having, you know, people in the deep who may or may not know what they're doing, or know what they're but aren't really doing what you want them to be doing, right? There's a lot of kind of weird stuff that goes on in the junior mining business. So I'm down here in Victoria. I've been around. I've signed 7 different letter of intents for different projects since I've become CEO. We've closed on one of them, terminated one of them, and then the other 5 are in various stages of moving in the right direction or not. And I would just say that this one with the 911 crew has probably made the most progress, the most meaningful progress during the due diligence phase of any of them. And part of that is the exploration work that they've been able to do. The videos and the samples that we will have assayed, and we will share the results of those kind of regardless whether we consummate the deal or not. Make those available to 911 and the public there as kind of, they're part of our due diligence phase, right? So again, there's part of this due diligence stuff on the project that's relevant, but also there's this due diligence phase on the people, and the fact that I look for situations where the project vendor can be the exploration services provider, and these guys at 911 are doing a very good job of that. There's exemptions in the permitting process for working with hand tools, and that's what they're doing in all these videos. So they are the quickest off the mark of any of the LOIs that I've signed, and they're probably doing what I would say is my favorite work, right? Which is really selective high grading at surface, and then a little bit of backpack drilling. Where does it go from here in terms of field work? Oh boy, yeah, that's a fun conversation, right? We can get into all kinds of stuff about, oh, you should do geophysics, you should do this, you should do that. There's a lot. And my focus is kind of continuing to work with the people who we have been working with so far, right? So this due diligence stuff with the 911 is kind of proof of concept that they can do this work. And so when you ask, what does it all mean? And the answer is kind of like, well, it doesn't really mean much yet. I would say that in, you know, kind of an objective sense for the junior mining business at large, I understand that. But in the specific context of what we're doing in this company, it does mean something, because it means we have a crew we can work with, right? So now we're potentially on a path that will take us from being a public company without much really going on, without people to do work, without projects really, to having a few of those projects and a few of those people in different places that we can work with. And then it's my job as CEO to kind of be an investment manager within the company, or somebody who's making bets or taking bets with different crews on different projects, right? And it's this question of how much money can we raise and what do we spend it on, right? Because we're not a company that's going to make a profit selling products anytime soon. We're an exploration company. So our job is to kind of raise risk capital, equity financing, and spend it in the most aggressive way possible to generate a chance for shareholders to have a significant return. And to my mind, the work that the 911 crew is doing provides that opportunity. It's the speed of the work that they're doing. It's the quality. I think they're doing high quality work as well. The visibility, the view, the ability to look over his shoulder and see what they're actually doing on any given day. That's a big one for me, right? Because a bunch of these projects, you get a couple pictures back and a description of what happened. And you may or may not be able to formulate a good model in your head of what that actually looks like on the ground. So the value of this video stuff is tremendous. It's been something I've been trying to get different groups to do for years, haven't had any progress. So what these guys are doing, to my mind, kind of sets a new bar in terms of what juniors should be doing to show people what's happening at site. And then there's this whole thing with their audience as well. My ability to kind of be part of their community is really valuable, right? Because otherwise, you know, who are you doing it for, right? A bunch of shareholders who I don't really have good communications with. One of the things that happened with this Kermode deal is that because I took it over, I didn't really build it, and I don't really know who all the shareholders are, and it hasn't done a lot of financings in recent years anyways, so there's a lot of people in it who are maybe kind of stale shareholders who maybe they've forgotten about that they own it. I've reached out to the larger ones and had some response back, but it's tough to find some of these people who, you know, may not have much good to say about the investment in the beginning at all anyways, right? So and if you start to understand really what the junior mining business is about and the kinds of things that happen in it, and then you study what I've been doing since I took over, you know, you may come to appreciate the fact that, you know, I haven't done a massive rollback to the stock yet. I've been talking about that, and it is a possibility, but I haven't done one yet, and that's kind of preserved. And I haven't done a bunch of large financings either to kind of dilute down, and haven't issued a lot of shares on different property deals. I've talked about issuing a lot of shares on property deals. I've talked about financings, but the share count hasn't really increased that much yet because I don't really want to, you know, it's my first time on a deal, right? Running a deal. So I don't want to get a reputation for completely damaging the existing shareholder base. But at the same time, I have to make it work with whatever conditions, you know, the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation in equity markets broadly is not good right now. From a contrarian perspective, it's a great time to be buying. From an issuer perspective, it's very dangerous times. There's a lot of kind of money out there that you may not want to take for various reasons. You know, there's a lot of kind of predatory capital, it would seem. I don't really know very much about that, other than, you know, the kind of urban myths that you hear on the street about all this stuff that goes on. So I try to avoid disaster in terms of the financing of the companies and what kind of business arrangements we get into. And then I also need to be confident that the people I'm working with on the field side are able to avoid disaster. And that's one of the things that the 911 guys, they help me sleep well at night, knowing that, you know, they're hungry to make meaningful progress on the project, and also that they're going to do it safely. Thank you guys. That it really means a lot to me for that. And again, the community here to be part of that is helpful, right? So that there's people like you, you know, this Mark Rose person who I don't know, but I wanted to shine a light on it because I figured it was a good question, you know, from the first person. What does this mean? And then it was a good answer too. And it was a very good answer for people who are not kind of specialists in the business. But then I wanted to kind of speak to you guys a little bit and just give you a bit of my sense of the specific context of what we're doing here and what makes this situation, you know, what you might miss with your standard answer, right? And so there's a website we have up. It's a Linktree page. And I've got a bunch of interviews that I've done talking to different people, myself, all kinds of stuff. There's a bunch of commentary online on ceo.ca that you can kind of dig into and start to unravel kind of the stock side of this more if you want to know that side of things. Yeah, I'm available too, right? I'm out here. And yeah, I look forward to going up to the project site as well sometime sooner than later. I don't know exactly when. Try and keep the expenses for the project down, de minimis, the company overall. It's been a year, haven't taken any salary for myself, or I continue to cover for some company expenses out of my pocket as well. And I was able to buy about 10% plus of the company. So that was another thing that kind of is a disciplining factor for me, right? Is that, you know, I didn't build this shell, but I'm gonna fix it if I can. And and you know, I've kind of tied myself to it in a meaningful way there by buying that stock. Maybe $150,000 worth of stock that it cost me to buy, and maybe 2 main purchases, and about half of that money I've been directly responsible for spending. And that process of really spending my own money on behalf of the company and kind of having a very clear sense of what it was used for and what we got out of that, that was something that I'm not gonna say it was life-changing, because I had already been doing stuff like that kind of in private business, but I think it was important for the kind of junior mining specialist investors who have their ideas about how these deals should be run and what management's incentives should be like. So I've been trying to walk the walk there with that stuff. And yeah, owning some of those investment decisions too as CEO has been, wow, you know, essential, but brutal, just brutal. All the different setbacks and challenges and things that can go wrong with any given project, right? And so, again, when you ask, what does this mean? There is the geology side of it that you got, and there is the business side of it that you got, Mark. But think about, you know, if you were doing this in a first-time CEO in a shell company that somebody took public. What company went, like 1996? It went public, and the total accumulated deficit is like 10 million over those years, which means that they only ever raised and spent 10 million in almost 30 years, 25 years. So it was pretty quiet at that shell, right? You start to appreciate what that stuff kind of means. And then you think about the fact that, hey, if this project is good, we might spend 10 million in the next, how many years, right? Look into comparables for other projects, other companies, right? And how much money they raise and how much they spend. You know, there's a kind of twisted joke that in the junior mining business, in a bad year, you lose $500,000. And in a good year, you lose 10 million. What? Yeah. You know, as I said, we're not selling widgets here. We are taking outsized bets on exploration results to try to find something that's, you know, a meaningful discovery that brings in interest from people who actually do have a balance sheet, right? And that's kind of the ecosystem too, right? And that's why I, as a CEO of a public company, I really like to go to these private guys like 911 Mining who are doing the work, and I like to give them a chance to take what they've been doing and kind of put it on a platform of a public company, right? Our public company is pretty light staffed. We don't really have a company geologist per se who's going to be telling these guys how to run their program. We've got a director, an independent director who's acting as our qualified person for various things now. Under 43-101, you can have a non-arm's length QP for things like news releases and stuff. Okay, you need an arm's length QP for large resource statements and stuff, but we're nowhere near that yet, right? We're really just starting out on a project that has some high-grade showings and the potential for some more meaningful endowment if we can practically, you know, and quickly mobilize, right? Because the investing audience, you know, they get tired, they get fatigued pretty quick of projects. So the project has to kind of progress quickly or else you risk losing their attention and kind of speculative fervor, right? So it's a lot of fun, and really glad to be able to link up with 911 and all the other people around them. So again, you find me online and watch for me in one of their videos there before too long, see if I can